Thank you. So I'm going to start off this with a quick prayer myself. Dear Father, I just ask that you guard and guide over the words that I say, the story that comes through today, the story of our family. Let the people on the other end, whatever situation they're in, if they know of people that this story could help, please put them in place. Put their listening ears on and their note fingers on, so they can take some notes if there's something that comes through, and let this 7 or 8 years not be used in vain, Father, with my son and with my family and with all that hear the story. I ask this in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Okay, so I'm gonna start here. So my name's Kevin Gustafson. I'm a financial advisor. My family, as most of this story took place when we were in Wisconsin, although we live in North Carolina now. So the, excuse me, I'm going to get some things squared away here on who I'm seeing. So the last few years have changed a little bit for us, but my family.
We can see you now, Kevin.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to tell you a story about my son, Lewis. That's the name of the story is The Prodigal Returns. Many of you certainly know the story of the prodigal son. And if you know enough about the prodigal son, I'd like you to kind of keep that in the back of your mind as you hear the story today about the father and the son and the good son, as they called him. Because that's a little bit of our story. I'm doing this as a case study into the drug abuse world and God's intervention into our son and into our family. Okay, so Lewis is my son, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about his childhood as well as our family. Lewis was our first son. He was the first grandchild in both families. He was the first niece and nephew in both families. He was a young man that I guess he stood out a little bit in certain ways. Everybody stands out, but the way Lewis stood out is he lived life kind of under his own terms, even as a little boy. He was gentle and kind. He was tall for his age and blonde-headed. He wasn't, I wouldn't say a leader, but I also wouldn't say he was a follower. He was just somewhat oblivious of others in that, not with adults, but with kids. I just remember watching him in the playground, and as long as he had a stick and a bucket, he was fine. He would hang out by himself a little bit. Not that he was against people, he just was kind of oblivious. And the reason I tell you that is to paint a picture of a boy that he was above average in his studies. He could memorize. He had a photographic memory, but somewhere in his period from being a young man to being in puberty, something happened as he started to recognize that people were maybe paying attention to him, and that he should pay attention to them. And it was something that he had to kind of change how he viewed his social life and his and all that. And I think that was a difficult transition for him. Again, I'm speaking like just thoughts, but it was a big part of what I focused on in my paper, because it was something that he really, there was a change as he got a little bit older. My family is my wife, Julie. Now, years later, we're married 28 years. I have another son who's the second son, Kevin Jr., who's 2 years younger than Lewis, and then two daughters, 6 and 8 years younger than Lewis. So we have 4 kids. My wife's a homeschool mom. Lewis was not homeschooled, but shortly thereafter, some of the other kids were for some period of time, if not most of the time. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the life of substance abuse and drugs that my son went through. And I really wanted to paint a picture of our family and my son a little bit, so you just could kind of play along with the transitions that he went, because I'm pretty open in this book, and I'm pretty transparent about my thoughts and my views. I shouldn't call it my book. I would call it my paper. As R.C. Sproul Jr. stated, why do bad things happen to good people? That only happened once, and he volunteered. I thought it was a really good quote, and it was a deep quote that we thought we were really good people. Honestly, we were Christians. We were faith-filled. We dedicated our family to the Lord. We were leaders in our churches and our small groups. We were the ones that were leading people to Christ, or at least trying. We committed our family young on. Once we became saved, my wife was saved first, and then I came thereafter. We committed our family so that our kids would be brought up in the ways that we weren't, and we were brought up in we had great lives, but we didn't know Jesus. So we knew the Lord was walking with us and was loving on us, but truthfully, our lives quickly became scrambled and discombobulated, and our plans for a life of normalcy went up in a plume of smoke. I thought that was kind of funny. So my son dipped his toe into the lake of drugs, and one day we got someone tattled on my son, and we found some marijuana in his car. We didn't think a whole lot of it. We knew it wasn't something that we hoped that he would do, but it was something that he did, and it was out of character for him. He was not a kid that went partying. He didn't go out on weekends with buddies. He stayed around, did stuff with the family. So the fact that he had weed in his car was a challenge, and we came across it as, okay, we have to deal with this and address this, but we also didn't overthink it in that it was that big of a deal. We weren't going to enable him through it, but because he wasn't out living a lifestyle of partying and doing delinquent things, we just didn't think much of it. So how we dealt with that is we actually had a counselor that we knew from our church, mega church up in Appleton, Wisconsin. And we met with the counselor and our son and said, let's just see to what extent this is an issue. And he made it seem as if it was no issue. And so this was just a beginning stage for us of what happened with our son. And this was like his first step into it. His first time we found out about it. Unfortunately, at that point, he was about a year into playing this game, before maybe 6 months to a year. He had already dipped his toe into pills as well as weed. And marijuana was something that would be kind of something that he'd be a part of for the rest of his life, but the pills were really the challenge as far as we're concerned. There came a day in there that he we set down some boundaries. We gave him a consequence for making a bad decision, and within that he fell in line, and it seemed like everything was fine. And then somewhere in there, he got up one day. He went to work, or so we thought. And I mean, this is brand new. We're not even thinking it's a big deal. But he went to work, and I went to work, and my wife did whatever she was doing that day. And after about 4 hours, we got a call from the restaurant that he worked at, and they said he never showed up. So we presumed that was a challenge, and we all got together, tried to reach him, couldn't find him. We went home, and on his bed, or I think it was on his bed, was a letter to us stating that he's running away, and he's going to live a life of drugs, and he's going to live a life of substance abuse and all that go with it. So that was a real challenge for us, because we just didn't know what to do. We had our vehicle. He's 17 at the time, and we knew that there's going to be a whole lot of things that are going to come down the pipe eventually through that. We had no way of reaching him. He didn't answer his cell phone. We think we knew where he was going. He was part of a youth group that went down and ministered on the south side of Chicago. And so when he said Chicago, we actually called the people that were affected or that were part of that ministry. And we went down, and my father-in-law actually got in the car. And I don't know if you know much about south side of Chicago, but it is not a place to hang out. It's where we used to minister youth group. I used to tell my wife when we were down there, it felt like I was in Beirut. Not that I've been in Beirut, but it felt like it was horrible. It was a place where there was crack and prostitution on every corner where we were meeting, and that's where my son was off to. So we were petrified, prayed up, and we went down and tried to find him. We never found him. We talked to a lot of ministers and people that were connected to the ministry down there, and we never found him. So long story short, we came back 4 or 5 days later. Our son finally texted and said, "I'm running out of money." Praise God. So he came back, and 3 or 4 days later after that, he came back. He just sauntered in the house like nothing happened. So we were very confused on how to deal with this situation and this issue with our son, because frankly, this was brand new. This was just a little while earlier. He was just there was no signs that this was going to be an issue, and this was going to be something that was going to be an issue for our son. And just like that, he's running away, stealing the car. I mean, we had an APB out on him. We had all that. So one of the things I thought was wise to do is when he came back, I took him into the police station, and because I had to take the APB or the stolen car request off of our car, and I thought, well, this will be sly. I will take my son in. I will ask the police officer if he will give my son a stern talking to. And I said, I don't care if you spit. I don't care if you swear. I don't care if you move your hands. I just want you to scare him straight. I just wanted him scared because my actions just weren't having any effect on him. And my stern words weren't having an effect. I mean, it just looked through me. And this was like a kid a couple months earlier, he didn't. But so I knew something was going on. So he went in, I'm behind the door, I'm watching him get berated by this police officer, and he like put a full show on to my son. My son didn't even budge. It was not even an issue that he cared. He's just like looking at the guy, like looking through him. And it was at that point that I knew, we have a problem that's bigger, because my son wouldn't have acted like that. So I know there was drugs involved. I know there was it ended up happening. There was more drugs and more a lot of psychedelic drugs and mind altering drugs. And no question, when you start dipping your toe into that, especially as a 17-year-old, there's a I don't know. I'll just call it a satanic side to what was going on in his young mind. He was prayed up every day. He was a young boy that knew Jesus, knew God. He had been to all the youth groups and all the everything, and we talked about all this stuff. So we knew it was in there, but at this point he was lost. So this is really the beginning of really a tough period of life, because when I watched him with that police officer, just looked through him, and he was respectful. He didn't budge. It was very frightening. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about, and I try to make it brief, but I'm going to just tell you what were his next steps and kind of how we dealt with a lot of them. So he ran away to Chicago. He came back from Chicago, like I said. We took him into the police station. The next thing happened is he wasn't thriving at school, so we thought a change of scenery would do him well. So he moved to a little bit of a country school. He never socialized. He never had sleepovers. He never had parties. Not that he didn't have friends, but they went hunting and did a little stuff like that. But one of the things that happened is we found out, and I tell you these nuances is because I think it's important as parents or your grandkids and stuff like that, as they go through things. He never used, he never was partying and going through that. He was using at school. He was using at lunchtime and go out to someone's car, smoke a cigarette, smoke something, and then go back into school. And there was not a whole lot of interaction with him on that. The other time he'd use is he'd use these psychedelic drugs. He'd go to bed at 8:30 o'clock at night. We'd give him a kiss goodnight, and we'd close the door, never even thinking, because not like they had TVs or anything in their room, I don't think. And he'd go into his room and use in his bedroom. And then, he'd sneak out at night. He'd do a lot of things. We didn't even think to even look. And we walked in on him plenty of times, and he was there. So we never even thought much about it. We just presumed he was doing fine because we couldn't see anything. So he was using at school and using in his bedroom. And then, of course, the social group that he interacted with was pretty rough. So it happened that after coming home from a friend's house one day, they took some weird drug. I'm not even sure what it was. And they were acting all loopy. The parent came home. Parent called us. We met with the parent. We had this sit down with the parent and the son and our son, and they said, "Oh shoot, we'll never do it again. We've learned our lesson. We understand that this is a bad thing. We don't want to do it anymore." And I thought, oh boy, I think we might have got through to him because there was another parent involved. But the reality was he came home, and I watched him. I was like, okay, I'm watching him for a while. I watched him walk to the backyard. And you know those your pocket, you have your main jean pocket, and then you got that little square at the very top. That's where he kept his drugs, his pills. He went outside and took a pill immediately after getting scolded. This was like, okay, praise God that we now have found him out so quickly, an hour after his prior incident. He's got a real problem here. So we tried to get him some help. He was unwilling to do it. And so basically I said, well, you cannot live in this house unless you live under the rules of our house, which is, you have to be tested. You're going to have to do all this. And he said, could I leave? And I said, well, you could leave. And he got up and left. I mean, and I packed a bag as a 17-year-old and left. And I thought, well, he'll just go to a buddy's house for a couple of days. I wasn't sure how his reaction was going to be, but he lived in the park. He lived outside in a park. Thankfully, it was nice weather in Wisconsin, but he lived in a park for quite a while, 3 or 4 or 5 days. We were up at a cottage that weekend. I got a call at 1 o'clock in the morning. He said, "Dad, I'm frightened with something. I'm frightened with something that's going on. I don't know what that was, but he said, I need you to pick me up. I'm 3 hours away now." So at 4 o'clock in the morning, I picked him up from some house, wherever he was, I don't know, found his way to. And he picked him up, brought him back to Michigan. And the consequence, we had told him, is that there was a boys' academy because he wasn't going to school. He wasn't doing his work. He was flunking out. And we knew that we needed him under a little bit more of a watchful eye. So he went to this place called Victory Academy for Boys. It's in the mountains. Sorry, it's in the woods of Michigan and Wisconsin, right up there at the border. And it was a place that it was like the first time the Lord put something in our place at a time when we desperately needed it, because we didn't know what to do. When you have a 17-year-old, there's just not a lot of programs for kids like that. Short of jail or something like that. But he wasn't, besides using drugs, he wasn't breaking any laws. And it's not like you can choose to put him in jail. So Victory Academy came along. It's a faith-filled place. It's a place that they loved our son, but they loved him with a strong hand, if you will. Not anything that they shouldn't have done, but he had to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning, and he had to do certain chores, and he obviously couldn't smoke and drink and use drugs and all that stuff. So he couldn't live like he wanted, because he was literally 4 or 5 miles from the nearest anything. And so he was in a tough situation. He turned 18 at Victory Academy for Boys. It's up in, like I said, in Amberg, Wisconsin, right at the border. And they were concerned at age 18 he was going to leave. And we had to do some smooth talking, and even some giving him some, I guess, some perks somehow. I forget what it was, but maybe supplying him a cell phone or something at some point for him to stay that last month, because he graduated in May. And again, these are not that big a deal when you're not in the middle of it, but getting him that degree or that high school diploma was really important, because we knew that the rest of his next couple of years may be a challenge, and at least he had that under his belt. And he was so close. So he did listen to us and stay there. But as he's graduating, we went up to have a going away meeting. And we went up there and said, what do you want to do? If you want to come home, we'll take you in, but you're going to have to live under our rules and regulations. And And he looked at us basically and said, I'm not interested. What are the other options? I'm going to do what I want to do. So we told him about a place in Chicago, and it was that again, the Lord supplied, put this other guy in our life that told us about this Jesus people. And if you know anything about Jesus people, there was a movement back in like the 70s or 80s where it was like a street movement. And it was about, these people who help the less fortunate in Chicago. At one point, it's like almost like communal living, where they live in this big hotel, 3 or 4 to a room, nothing that's that exciting, but they're given free food, free job, and like $20 a month to buy toothpaste and toothbrushes. And these people are wonderful people. I'm not sure that their faith walk and my faith walk are exactly the same, but they do a lot of street work with the less fortunate and feeding of the homeless, and they're doing just some wonderful things. So God was putting another place in for our son at a time when, frankly, he was, we thought he was pretty clean because he had been at this place for a while. So he goes to Japuza, Jesus people, and he had one quick instance I'll tell you about that. It's kind of neat, but it kind of showed us that the Lord was with him. He was working one day, left he left his job for the day, and went in the backyard, or the back, like the alley, bringing some garbage out, and the Lord took a hold of him legitimately and almost put him in a state of seizure. He wasn't using drugs at that moment, but put him in almost like a seizure, where he shook to the point of falling, didn't hurt himself, and then laid on the ground for like 3 or 4 minutes and shook. And he knew that it wasn't a seizing from a drug. He knew it was the Lord. He knew the Lord. He knew who the Lord was, and he knew that the Lord was still with him, and therefore he worked hard to deny that was the case for all those years that he was using. But nonetheless, our son had a God interaction, and the Lord told him, and he told us, that you will not be able to use drugs, and I won't allow it. And so our son, interestingly, the next day or two was kicked out from prior activity prior to the shaking, and he was kicked out because they just couldn't handle his lack of following the rules and things like that. When he was in Chicago for like that 6 or 8 months, he had been able to continue to use drugs, primarily dope, weed, I think, because he would help people move. There's always someone in the downtown inner city area who had like a moving van, and they'd need to move the couch up to their bedroom or up to their 3rd floor, whatever it was. So he always had access to a little extra money because he'd do these little jobs for people. So he was still using drugs, but Jesus people showed him that the Lord was still with him. And as he left, he was kicked out. They put him on a bus back to Appleton. So now he's back firmly and in our hands, and now we're back to kind of square one a little bit, and trying to get him some help and see what happens next. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our family at that point. I'll just tell you, in our family, with all this going on, 3 kids, we've had 2 or 3 other kids that we've kind of taken in for a period, like a year. We'd have the boy from Jesus people lived with us, and so we've had a lot of people in and out of the house, and just kind of listening to the Lord, and Lord's put a lot of neat people in our life and in our path. But in all honesty, we were struggling mightily. My marriage was struggling. We put it on each other a lot. Something you did or something I did, was part of the problem. And so that was a real challenge for Julie and I as a married couple at that point, probably married 20 years. I was really focused on my business before, and she was very focused on the kids. And then all of a sudden this came out. Now we have to come together not that we weren't together, but we were just, we're very reactive in lots of ways. So I'll get into that a little bit more towards the end, but it's, we were really shaken. I remember my second son, Kevin Jr., telling me, this doesn't happen to our family. And I would say that's a bit of how I felt. Stuff like this doesn't happen to our family. It happens to other families. It happens to, the family on the other side of the track, maybe. It just didn't feel like it happened to us. As we've come to find out, that's not the case. It happens to all families, and, it's just how you deal with it. So I got a good quote I thought was good. It's in her book, Resilience, Elizabeth Edwards, her husband was, I just like the quote, not necessarily the source, but Elizabeth Edwards talked about resilience. Resilience is accepting your new reality, even if it's less good than the one you had before. You can fight it. You can do nothing but scream about what you've lost, or you can accept and try to put together something that's good. I thought that was a really great quote. Resilience is accepting your new reality, even if it's less good. It was less good. This was our new perspective of where we were at. Also, Corrie ten Boom, who you probably have all heard about her book, The Hiding Place. She also wisely asserted, some knowledge is too heavy. You cannot bear it. Your Father will carry it until you are able. This time in our life was just too rough to go at it alone. I'll be honest, I don't know how people get through this stuff without the Lord, without having the prayer, whether it was the separation a little bit between our families or my wife and I, or our kids. Again, we didn't never separated like apart, but we were just having a hard time. Lewis was far from God and definitely was our prodigal son. And so back to Jesus People. Lewis left Jesus People. He called us. He said, "Dad, I just was in the park last night in Appleton," because he's back in our town, and I bought a bag of Vicodin and I took it all, and nothing happened. So the Lord wasn't going to allow him to use, at least at that point. So with that, he was angry. He was scared. He knew the Lord was working with him, and he knew the Lord wasn't going to let him continue down that path. Sadly, it's just the beginning, but it was a time where it gave him pause to enter a rehab. So he entered rehab for the first time after Jesus People. Again, I would say Lewis was about 20 or something at that point. He was different. Again, I told you earlier, painted a picture of a little boy, a gentle little boy that wasn't involved in things of yuck. I mean, he just wasn't into that stuff. And now he was the kid. I remember going to his rehab for a parent day or something, and he was out there playing volleyball, and he looked happy and enjoying himself. But he's social, and my son's 6'6" when he's healthy, 6'6", 250. He's a beast, he's a strong young man. But he was out there, and I knew he was doing okay, because when his weight was a little heavier, it was good. He was doing fine. When his weight was way low, it was because he wasn't eating, because he was using his money for bad things. But I'm watching him at the rehab playing volleyball, and he's out there playing volleyball with a cigarette in his mouth. And I thought to myself, come on. I mean, this is nuts. But it was like he adopted that persona. Like, I don't care what anybody thinks. I'm going to do it. I don't give a care about cigarettes. I mean, that's the least of our problems with our son. I wish he didn't smoke, but he has bigger issues going on than that. But he just looked like a dope. He just looked like he was trying to play this tough guy persona. And I knew that's not him. It wasn't him. I know kids that it wasn't him. So he goes to Nova, gets out of Nova. He writes us letters, does all the stuff they do after rehab. He learns AA, NA. He learns the 12 steps. He writes us letters about how he's sorry for his actions and all that. After Nova, they suggested that he be sent to Prescott, Arizona. It's a community that is with sober living homes. They have a whole community of sober living homes. It's like an aftercare. So after he's done with his 28 days in rehab, he goes to the chapter 5. He lives with 6 or 8 different guys, 10 different guys maybe. They live in one room. They all talk. They have their little sessions in the morning, and then they go off and work during the day. As a dad, you can only imagine the costs that go into all these things. But with sober living homes, it's really $1,000 out of my pocket, and then he goes there and he has to pay the way. So it's a good system. They don't accept at the ones we went to and had. They don't accept Medicare. They don't accept medical cards. They don't do anything. It's all out of pocket. The child has to, or the adult has to pay their own way, which is really good. So Lewis went off to chapter 5 in Prescott 4 or 5 months later. I went to visit him. He's seemingly doing well. He's now taken to this lifestyle of Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, and the 12 steps. He's there, and he looked at me when we were there, and I mean, it was tough. He was working, getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, walking to work. He was falling asleep at work because he's so tired, because he was up late having meetings, and I felt bad for him. So he asked me if it would be all right if I allow him to move out of the home at chapter 5 and move into an apartment and then the next block over. I thought, he said there was lots of drug use in his chapter 5 home, and that scared me. So he probably played me, and nonetheless, he went to the new apartment. It was probably party central for 3 or 4 months until he left. Seemed like he did okay there, but I think it was just one of the decisions that my emotions and my desire for my son to get well. I think it just was that time where my son looked at me, and I looked at him, and I thought, well, he's got to snap out of this soon enough. Well, as Ralph Waldo Emerson stated, the only person you are destined to become is the person you decide to be. Lewis was deciding and choosing what he was going to become of his future. The times that he had experienced were hardships. He had put himself in a world of pain and a world of hurt and a challenge. One thing about opiates, if you understand anything about drugs, so you use an opiate for pain, right? So you take an opiate. If you have pain, it makes your elbow feel better, right? When you're an addict using opiates, what happens is you're just trying to get to normalcy. Like my life, I live normal. It's just a normal life, and I feel normal. When you're a user, you feel rotten until you take that magic pill or something else, and then it makes you feel normal. So as a simple mind like mine, I'd say, why wouldn't you just be normal and get rid of drugs, and then you'll always feel normal? But it was just a challenge that with substance, because opiates aren't necessarily something that gets you high. It's maybe some people it does, but it's not like different drugs like that. It's really something that makes you feel normal. Like if you have pain, pain's gone when you take the pill. So just for perspective on a drug like that. So it's really it's crazy to think that you'd fight to be feeling so bad every day. But anyway, Louis was struggling at that time. Again, back to our family's reacting more so than proactive at that time, because this is all a new game for us. Our kids are doing fine, but they're challenged. Our second son, who's close to Louis' age, got to remember a lot of his friends and Louis' friends were friends. So it was really difficult on him. I'd say probably most difficult on him of all the kids, because he was closest to him in age. And I think there was an embarrassment factor that he went through, and an ashamed factor with his brother. So I won't get too deep into that, but there's a lot of repercussions even over the years that have come from that situation. And a lot of it is bitterness and hurt and anger and pain that he's built up and accepted. So how he goes forward, we'll see. For me, I got real involved with some men, especially one guy by the name of John. John's quadriplegic fireman. John had a diving accident, broke his neck. John's 6'5", very athletic, and now he can't move a finger, like legit. He can't move, and he's. I met him 4, 5, 6 years after this happened. So John was on the top of the world as a fireman, has one young child. He falls, he has an accident, breaks his neck. The next week, his wife divorces him. The next week, she has their second kid. The next week, his best friend leaves, marries, or gets engaged to his ex-wife. I mean, this guy had, not only is he never going to move again, but he has lost his wife. He's got new babies. His life is shambles. And that was who God put me with. And I know why, because I needed someone who had it tougher than me. Because you do feel for yourself. I felt bad for myself. And as much as we were praying and dealing with stuff, we were holding on to a lot of the pain. And I'll be honest with you, I identified as the father of the son who had the drug problem. If I met you, I can guarantee you within an hour of having a conversation with you, you would have known what I was going through, because I needed to tell somebody. And I was identifying as going through that. And that was not appropriate. So John helped me a lot. And I'll tell you what, I went to John's house or apartment many times, and went there feeling pretty bad. And I turned around and being ashamed of my thoughts because of watching this man convulse and the challenges that he has to go through. Just to get up in the morning is harder than what I go through in a day, even at the worst times. So God put me with him. He was a God follower. He loved the Lord. He was biblical. We walked through David and the story of King David, like from start to finish, real slow and really, and this was over years. And it was really neat for me to do that. But I'll be honest with you, John and maybe a few other people were in my life, but at the same time, we had lots of challenges with our family, and I'll talk about that at the end a little bit. But it was a real challenging time. But the Lord put this man in my life who talked me through it, and watching him feel bad for me was like embarrassing. And Julie had the same thing. She was involved in church and leadership at church, and started her own Bible study. To this day, she has her own Bible study. She's always had them, and she just goes straight scripture, straight from the word, and the Lord just leads her through scripture. And he put like 6 ladies all going through different stuff in her life, and it was wonderful. And God provided. And I'll even tell you this: I'm in a business that wasn't always easy. I'm in a business with investments in markets and things like that. And the Lord really provided for us, especially in some of these times where, these things aren't cheap going, and the Lord would like put $15,000 that I didn't have before, and I'd earn it in a way that I didn't even expect that it would earn, so I could pay for my son's little academy or something. It just was a blessing. God did bless us through those times, and in a way that I know had to be the Lord. Bill Hybels of Willow Creek Church in Chicago stated that storms draw something out of us that calm seas don't. And it's true. When you're dealing with someone like your child we love so much that it's nearly unexplainable, being calm during a challenging time and giving it all to God is a very difficult thing to do. So all the things that have happened up to this point are us, trying to solve this issue with our son. But now I'll get to a little quick section of now the fun really beginning. And I'd say that tongue in cheek. So we're at our cottage. We get a call one night. Louis is back working and 5 or 6 months doing okay, but kind of hanging out a lot with guys. And it's hard to control that when they're 19 or 20 years old, 21 maybe at that point. He's doing okay, but he's, my line was always, they sit around all day and drink Monsters and smoke cigarettes. That's kind of what he was doing when he wasn't working, and we mandate that he would work. But so we got a call at the cottage that night, and my son comes storming up. We have guests at the cottage, and my son's storming up the stairs crying. Again, he would have been 19 or 20 at the time, the son crying. And he said, Dad and Mom, Louis OD'd. So I didn't have any idea what OD'd meant, really, because OD'd with pills, no, but OD'd with weed, no. I mean, what does it really mean? But if you had to ask me that day how I felt, I thought he died. He overdosed. He's dead. So I pick up the phone. I sadly say, yes, what's going on? And he said, yeah, your son overdosed. We gave him Narcan, and he'll be fine in 15 minutes. He'll be home in 15 minutes. And well, on one level, we were excited about the fact that he was fine, but on the other level, it meant that heroin was now in his life. And heroin was something that was weird. It was scary. We didn't know really what that meant. Pills seemed mild, really, just it's kind of a young idiot using pills. But heroin, that's like the stuff on the TV show Intervention, or that's the stuff with needles. That's the stuff with spoons and lighters. And it was a weird drug, and it was something that we didn't really understand. So this is going to take us down this level of actions that our son went through, and that we went through with him on different levels. The frightening thing that I divulged a little bit more in my thesis on was Lewis. I'm telling you only a little bit of what's in there. Nancy and George probably read more about what's in there, but it's only a little bit that I know of. I'm sure there's so many more overdoses and so many more things that I have no idea. These are just things I know of. Maybe accidents or holdups or fights or whatever in the life that he lived. So that's a frightening thought. But through it all, we don't need to know it all. I just think of my own youth. And I don't think my parents knew a whole lot of what I was in the midst of. I wasn't doing too much craziness, but I snuck. They just didn't have any idea. And I just know that he probably did some of the same stuff. So at this point, this overdose has brought in a lot of fear to our family, and a lot of fear to our extended family, and so much fear that, frankly, they texted or called 45 times a day, probably for a little while there. So much so that it was causing us, we could never get away from it, because every night they'd call, or every other night, and grandmas and my in-laws and people like that, just wanting to know the intricacies because they're scared. And that I had a meeting with them at one point that really torqued them off. They were not happy with me. But I basically told them, we're not going to give you any information unless it's need to know. And here's a big thing. We'll talk about it. But the intricacies of an argument during the day or whatever, because it's all about my other kids too, and the rest of my family. And the minute we turned off the family communication, it got better. But unfortunately, they still found a way to text my kids, how's your brother doing? It was one of the things my son, we'll call it per the prodigal, the good son, Kevin Jr., he said it was always so hurtful that when Louis was doing so poorly, it hurt him so dramatically, because they'd never call him and ask him how he's doing. They'd call him and ask him how dumb he's doing, or in his mind, he's thinking, who cares about my brother? Why don't you ask what I'm up to? Because he was a successful young man. So it was really hurtful for him. And again, there's more to it than that, but for today, it's just was a tough thing for him. And in the next year or so, Lewis was having a hard time with a lot of the stuff that was going on in his life. He's still using. We don't know how much he's using heroin or pills or whatever. That OD didn't scare him straight. So he ended up going back to Nova for a second time. And at this point, things are getting a little rocky with him, and that his effort is pretty weak. He goes to Nova for a second time, which is the rehabilitation. He lasts about 20 days. They suggest, okay, you're good enough for now. We need to get him out of there, I think. I think he was at this point, he has a girlfriend in Wisconsin. He has a girlfriend, but she's holding on for dear life because he's no one to be part of, boyfriend, girlfriend stuff at this point, because he's having a hard time sustaining. So he goes back to another sober living home and in Milwaukee. So now he's down in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, sober living home, and dealing with trying to get back on the path. He got kicked out of that. I started with a friend of mine, Jeff, a sober living home in Milwaukee. We had our own sober living home. Primarily, they're long story, but we thought we could. We had enough experience, which who knows how much experience you need to do that, but we certainly didn't. We had a successful sober living home, just not for my son. We had a lot of kids that were doing very well, but we had to kick our own son out of our own sober living home from lying and sneaking in and sneaking out, and who knows what was going on in Milwaukee. So fast forward, I mean, again, I could just go deeply into that, but we had a sober living home and it went okay. But we just wanted to help our son. We just didn't know what we should do. So after this, my son had another incident with an overdose. This time we got a call. They had a John Doe in the hospital, but one of our friends knew what was going on with it at the party, that he was taken away by ambulance. They called us and they said he had an incident, and we called all the hospitals, couldn't find him, and then finally asked them if they had a John Doe. They did. It was our son. He was on life support for 9 days. He had ingested some drugs into his lungs, I guess, and got an infection. And so at this point, now it's not just a one-time deal. It's an ongoing thing. And again, how many of these he had, I have no idea. But but this is the second one. At this point, we're starting to get angry. We see him in the hospital. He gets the tube pulled out, which is horrific to watch. And he cried. He was sad. I'm so sorry I did this to you again. Frankly, without getting too deep into it, he went right back to it. Within 2 weeks, 3 weeks, he went right back to it. At this point, like as a family, we're really struggling. At this point, my wife and our kids were in a state of mind that just wasn't. It was fine, but they just were struggling so much. So my wife got in the car one day. She was planning on going to the cottage for a week, and she got in the car and she said, "I'm going to go find a place for us to move. We need a reset. We need to do something different." And we talk about this now because it was really difficult for me because of my work and all that. But this was the Lord putting on her heart. We need a reset. We need to shake this up because, the girls were hurting so bad. All their babysitting jobs canceled because you have a brother who's maybe going to show up at the house, and I don't blame them. It was just a really tough time for the kids, and so my wife heads off to North Carolina to just see. We had relation in the Carolinas and thought we might want to move down there, but we just needed to give the kids a fresh start. So coming up in a minute or two, I'll tell you about North Carolina when we moved to North Carolina. So that was pretty cool. But in this period of time, we also thought we need to do something different. He's been in rehabs. He's been in counseling. He's been with people who are faith-filled. He's been he's been on meds and depression meds and anxiety meds and all sorts of drugs. Do you realize that when you're an alcoholic, they give you drugs to get you off of alcohol, like Xanax and benzodiazepine and things like that? Well, then they get addicted to that. So, so he's using drugs, having challenges. I don't ever try to call him a drug addict because I don't want to put that name on him, but he's using drugs pretty heavily, and they're treating him with other drugs. And, these guys are great self-medicators. I mean, my son knows how to self-medicate. He even to this day, he could tell you what different interactions and things different substances have. He's just bright in that way. So anyway, we got a program. He's living on the streets. He's doing horrible. This is after, like I said, the second life support overdose. But we thought we got to do something different. So we started looking outside the box, not using the system, or not, the U.S. system, but what does Canada have? What does Mexico have? What does the Caribbean have? What do they do? So we found this system in Canada called Ibogaine. And Ibogaine is really just doctor. You have a doctor. Well, he flew to Vancouver, basically. You have a doctor. The doctor gives you a pill of some sort, and there's a treatment, a system that it takes your body through, almost like you fall asleep, and there's a little bit of, I don't know, it's like a reset to some extent. I can't get too into it, but we had people that we knew that had some success with it, and so we sent our son to Canada. But one of the big challenges is I had to get him detoxed first, and at this point he's on hundreds of dollars a day worth of heroin, and we needed to get him detoxed. And if you know anything about detox, it's a really tough thing for that person going through it. So he's decided to get free of drugs, and the detox is like they stick you in a room with a 6-pack of Mountain Dews and say, I'll see you in 2 days, and put this helmet on because you might need it. I mean, it's a bad thing. I've watched it. I've watched him. And long story short, there's a system that we found through this Canadian company that they suggested, and it's called Hientos, Heantos, Heantos. Hientos, and what it is it's a Vietnamese treatment that they used for farmers of opium fields in Vietnam. And when they'd have a drought, all these guys and gals who were addicted, now they couldn't get their opium anymore because there was a drought, and they'd have this mass chaos in Vietnam. And so these doctors came together and got this system called Hientos. And what it is it's just a 19 different vitamins put together in a pill. And 3 days before you stop using, you start this pill regime, as well as laxatives and other things to get the body flowing. And you take all these baths with these I don't know, powders and all sorts of stuff. But long story short, we detoxed my son. I detoxed him in 4 days, and he said it was like nothing. And he was coming off of a high dose of heroin. And he said, Dad, that was like nothing, because he did it 5 other times, and as part of the story. So he knew what nothing was, and he wanted to get free. So he went to Canada, did this treatment. It went okay. I think it went okay. It's not the end of the story, but it went okay, and that it gave him some freedom from drugs a little while later. I think it helped him to not have the desire. And it apparently it reset something, but not completely, because the story's not over. So somewhere in here, we moved down to North Carolina. It's a great move for our family. Difficult for me because I have to travel back to manage my clients, and not every week, but I went back about every other week. And so it was a big deal. Fortunately, I was able to go back. A lot of times, Lewis, in later years, was back in Wisconsin, and I could meet with him. So anyway, it was a great start for our family. Our homeschool kids, we brought our horses down. It was a beautiful thing. Lewis comes down with us when we moved, helped us move, and we're going to give him a fresh start as well. He went to Florida for a treatment, an amino acid treatment that I'll also mention in a second. That was a program because these guys have so bad. They've made so many bad decisions with their eating, and so many bad decisions with their life that they need some treatment to kind of heal their brain. So he was on a IV treatment for amino acids for quite a while, and he went down to Florida and did that. Finished the treatment in Florida, stayed there for a few months, came back. He was going to give Wisconsin another try. He didn't want to live with us in North Carolina, probably because of the rules. Drove back to Wisconsin, overdosed again. Stopped in Milwaukee, picked up some drugs, said he was his last time he was going to ever do it, allegedly, and he overdosed again. So we're deep into this at this point. He's overdoses. I mean, you don't get like an unlimited amount. You have to have someone there to see you. You have to have someone there with Narcan. You have to have a paramedic or a cop or somebody close enough to give it to you. But our son went back and overdosed again. At this point, we're gone in North Carolina, so I flew up and handled dealing with the situation at hand. But frankly, it didn't change him. It almost like kicked him in even a higher gear. So at this point, to simplify the story, Lewis, a few months later, using upwards of $200 a day of heroin, gets arrested. I was on the phone with him when he got arrested. It was a beautiful thing. I hate to say it like that, but it was a beautiful thing because he could have killed somebody. You know, he's doing some bad things, buying drugs. He gets arrested. By being arrested, that turned it over to there being a social worker that had to be involved in this situation. A social worker took his case, and that was kind of a positive, I think, because the social worker, this is a short period of time. Within a week, he's seen the social worker a couple times. I'm helping him to get there. He's seen the social worker, and the social worker basically looked at him and said, "You don't have much time, buddy." And after she saw him for a week, she brought me in the office and looked at me and said, "Sir, your son has less than 2 or 3 days to live unless you get something figured out right now. He's got to get somewhere because he's on such a high amount." Again, he's a big boy, so he probably could handle a lot. So this is kind of where his story ends in terms of we find this place called U-Turn for Christ. It was the worst place of any place he went. It was the leadership was poor, in my opinion. The mentorship was wonderful. So they had these boys who had been there, tough dudes. These guys were out of prison. These are the guys with the teardrops and stuff. These are some tough cookies. And my son went there, and I think somewhere in that trip, he found the Lord. He told me he did. There's such a story, but I just don't want to spend too much time on all the little intricacies. But you know, I'm driving him here to U-Turn for Christ. It's through the night. It's to Tennessee. He needs to get there. And our conversation was so enjoyable. And he's detoxing off of hundreds of dollars a day of this drug, and he's struggling. And somewhere the Lord was just there. He just intervened with my son and I. It was I don't know. I just had a feeling, but I always was optimistic at each one. But this one, when I dropped him off, and it was kind of funny because I dropped him off, and my son got out of the car. He's at this another sober living, and he gets out of the car and he looks at the guy. He goes, "I got to run to the tree and go to take a pee. I have to pee. I haven't peed in 8 hours, and I have to pee." But I knew what he was doing is he was bringing his little baggie of cigarettes over there because they didn't allow cigarettes. And it was kind of like this thing, like, yeah, I know he didn't have any drugs because we had just been in this jail situation. He had nothing, but he had cigarettes, and it was like this one little thing he was holding on to. And I just laughed. I'm like, "Lord, you got this." And as I drove away, I just really felt positive about it. So anyway, 8 months later, we see him. He looks better. He's a different boy. He has a different look on his face. He has no twinkle in his eye, and he just looked like things were positive were in his life. There was a different, like a heart thing. I didn't even know him. I didn't know him since he was a little boy. I didn't know my son since he was 16, started drugs, but now he's clean. He's literally clean. And as he told us, they went to church one day, and he knew early on, this is not something that's going very well for me. I'm disgraceful in lots of ways, and I'm taking my family down with me, and I'm taking my siblings down with me, and my friends. And he knew he was disgraceful, and praise God, he got on his hands and knees that day, and and that's really where his story of using ends. He moved back to our house. He initiated with a church group. He got involved with young men that were positive on him. I always thought it was interesting. These guys are like special forces, and these guys are like big time military, Navy SEALs and all this. These are his friends, and these guys were, but yet the Lord was part of everything for him. So he saw that. He saw that as being cool, as being something like these guys were great. And they weren't perfect guys. You know, it's not like they didn't come over with a 6-pack of beer once in a while, but they'd go home with 2. You know, it's not like they slammed them. So it was always, you know, I always watched my son, and he made really good decisions. So at that point, he became a caddy, and golf became his life. So one of the things I will tell you, as we got through this point, and you know, I can say this now, 3 or 4 years later, praise God. At the time, I wasn't sure that it was just moving on to the next issue a month later or 6 months later. You don't know it until you walk through it. But now, years later, I will say, Psalm 34:1 says, "I will extol the Lord at all times. His prayers will always be on my lips." This is very similar to 2 Samuel 22:50, which is, "Therefore I will praise you, Lord, among the nations. I will sing praises of your name." Psalm 77:14 says it's a model for living, especially in difficult times. King David emphatically states, "I praise you, God, for you are the God who performs miracles. You display your power amongst all the peoples." Similarly, Deuteronomy 7:9 appropriately says, "I praise you, God, for you keep your covenant of love to 1,000 generations of those who love you and keep your commandments." So, my son, like I said, he was a caddy. He was a big high-end caddy at a nationally renowned golf course, did very well. Somewhere in the last 6 months or so, after 2 or 3 years of caddying, he's now stepped back, and he's becoming an electrician, which is really a career job. Caddying could be a career job, but electrician is a real job, and it puts him in a position where he's working and can pretty much work forever. So he's doing really well. So that's the story of Lewis, and it's a wonderful story of challenge and overcoming. It's a challenging. It's a point of how we stuck with him. Of course, it was never an issue that we weren't going to stick with him, but we didn't give up on him. And it's easy to when he hurts you so bad. And it's a story of a husband and wife who fought through. 90% per our counselor, 90% of families that have a heroin addict get divorced. Not going to lie, we both wanted to many times, but we fought through it, and we hung on. It's a story of another son, the good son, it's why you don't build up bitterness in your heart, because he's had some consequences from bitterness and some consequences from anger. It's a story of the little girls. We were able to keep them out of it, out of a lot of stuff. But my little boys, when they were young, on a school night when they were 12, would be in bed by 8:00. My little girls, because of this stuff going on in our life, we didn't have a bedtime for our 12-year-olds. Things changed, and that there was people calling, there was stuff going on. We were almost manic to some extent, and then depressed. So we made it through, but nonetheless, it was a very difficult road. So I'm just going to finish real briefly with some. I'm lost my place here as I'm flicking my finger. I'm going to give you some leadership implications. And some things and some lessons that we learned, and that I think could be worthwhile, that you can take back to your families and your friends and your churches. And I pray that they reach you in a way. So in all honesty, I would hesitate to ever take opiates. Of course, we had a bad experience with opiates, but pain pills that are narcotics, you don't know how you react. My son got stoned off of Vicodin. I've had Vicodin. It makes my hurting shoulder go away. My wife has taken Vicodin earlier. It made her sick to her stomach, but never did anything for the pain. But for my son, he got stoned off of it. There's actually a test. The Lord put us with this lady at this meeting one day. There's a test you can take, a litmus test, something like a litmus test. Maybe you put it on your tongue or pee on it or something. I don't know. But maybe it's a blood test. But there's a way that you can see if you're someone who's prone to that, because there are people with that have different blood types, or I don't know, chemical makeups that some people feel differently on that stuff than our son. But he got a buzz from it in a way that most people didn't. Generally, when you have surgery and things like that, Advil and Tylenol are just fine. We've had surgeries and different things. Advil and Tylenol is just fine. Be very careful. There is a new pain drug called Exparel. Exparel is a non-narcotic drug. My assistant's husband is the guy who sells it. It's fantastic. It's used in place of opiates. You can put it either on a section or your whole body. So if your shoulder hurts and you have surgery, instead of needing all this pain stuff, I will tell you, the medical community is. I'm trying not to give too big of opinions, but I don't think they're all necessarily for you. They're for selling more pharmaceuticals, and our family is a byproduct of that. And praise God, we're getting through it, and we're going to get through it. But the pharmaceutical industry is they don't really care about my little family. They just care about selling drugs, and some of them work. And we've used some that have been positive, but the system, the U.S. system that our son went through was one treatment to another treatment to this and now you need this antidepressant and to offset this anti-anxiety and it was just this craziness. So I would also never use a narcotic with a child. He was 14 when he first had it, or 13, something like that. I would not use a narcotic with a child. I would set strong boundaries for my child, especially one who is struggling with drugs, cigarettes, alcohol, chewing tobacco, stealing, pornography. Set a boundary. It sounds simple. We didn't do great always with it, but I needed to have a boundary. So if he broke my boundary, he had a consequence. And like I kept my kids on our cell phone plan a lot longer than I probably should have, because I wanted something to be able to take away. I wanted something to take away if they had some sort of a consequence if they were making bad decisions, and it worked. So you need to set boundaries. There's a good book by the name of Boundaries that if you haven't read it, it'd be good. If you have kids or siblings or family members who you see, oh, whoa, they have some weird boundaries or no boundaries, send them the book. Just anonymously put it in their mailbox one day. Number 3, I would be stronger with my son next time. I came from a family that didn't have a whole lot of conflict. My wife had a little bit more, but I had no conflict in my upbringing. So having conflict with my kids and my wife was not natural for me. I whimpered a lot and things that I should have done. It's my role to keep my family safe, and I didn't always do a great job at it. When we got response from our son is when we had when he had a consequence. When we got a response for our son is when we kicked him out of the house. When we said, you're going to have to leave if you do that. Sleeping at the park isn't the end of the world. If you have a daughter, different story. But for a 6'6" boy, yeah, sleep in the rain a couple nights to see how that feels, and then it changes their perspective a little bit. Putting him in the boys' home and all these sober living homes, man, he cried and he was miserable in those places. And I don't know that they all help, but they're part of his story. It changed his actions. One of our challenges was he was under the age of 18 when this all started, and a lot of rules in different states are really limited in what you can do. Number 4, I would seek outside help and outside remedies and non-traditional means, along with homeopathic and naturopathic doctors or people that practice that stuff. A lot of times like I said, they're going to treat you just with drugs, generally, or or different treatments, but the U.S. medical system isn't going to treat you with a treatment that's God-centered or Jesus-centered. They're going to treat you with a treatment that comes out of their book, that maybe they were trained in. And again, a lot of them are really wonderful in how they do it. But in our case, I would say you have to go the route you have to go initially, but seek out other remedies and treatments. And like I said, we went to Canada. We almost sent them to Caribbean. We almost sent them different places for different treatments. Because frankly, I just needed to save my life, the life of my son. And the Lord just kept putting these people in our place, to help us. Which makes me think of just one quick comment on that. A lot of our friends and a lot of our family weren't as close for a time. But the Lord had supplied us with so many people that put in our path. I'll be honest with you, the person that brought me to Morning Star, which brought me to here, is a gal by the name of Tricia. And Tricia kept seeking us out, knowing what we were going through. She kept seeking us out. She was a little bit more of a spirit-led Christian, which wasn't in my Catholic upbringing, and even my non-denominational first few years of being a Christ follower. But she just kept seeking us out, and the rest is history. So the Lord did supply us with what we needed at a time when we really needed it. Number 5, look into Hientos treatment. Hientos, again, is a great way to detox. And when I think it's because I saw it in my son. I saw how hard he detoxed off of such a crazy drug and a crazy amount. But for any of you like not had to quit smoking or quit drinking or give up chocolate or worse, lose heavy weight and all these things, if you've gone through that, you know what it is to have to be disciplined. And if cold turkey for some of those are okay, but for drugs, it was just a really tough thing watching them detox our son or detox other people. It was really other people that I saw. And once we saw this Hientos and the program that came with it, it was amazing. So that was a really big key. And if they're willing to detox, to make it easier, it's not super expensive. I don't know, maybe I'm at 6. Find the local Al-Anon group. The Al-Anon group is Alcoholics Anonymous for like families. And it's a place where you go, you sit down, you talk about what's going on in your life with other people who are going through the exact same thing. Different drug, different alcohol, different something, but they're going through things that are paralyzing to them. And you could find out what's going on in their life and how they're overcoming and how they're helping their family member who's really struggling. We met with lots of young people, lots of older people. We got different perspective. And frankly, it really helped us to understand that A, we didn't cause it. We didn't cause his issue. And B, there's a lot of other people going through it with us. So that was really important. The next one on my list is be strong with your family. You need it needs to be you and your closest people. Frankly, you are in a fight or flight type of situation. And when you have too much noise from the outside, not to say close yourself off from it, be with them, pray about it, but they don't need to know every single move of this drama. And it is a drama. It's every single day a drama, and it's all different. And your emotions are, my wife is more verbal with her emotions. I just suck it in and I'm more, not that I'm not verbal at times with her maybe, but I just like hold it in and numb myself. So we need to find our way to people to help us to get through this. And a lot of times family isn't it. Sometimes it is, but it wasn't for us at that point. Fast forward to today, the Lord has used all of it and brought us all back together. As Louis is doing better, so is the family. And frankly, they're finding the Lord. They're using the experience for my son. They've come to the Lord. They've come to, a couple of them have come to Christ. They've been saved through it. And we were weird to them when we were going through it, how we integrated the Lord so deeply into our patterns. But they came back and they came to the Lord. And I'm not saying like one or two, like many, and they're gonna, and more will come. Especially in crazy times like this, that they know that that we're a step ahead of on certain things, because the Lord is our guide and our guidepost, and where our starting point is. And then lastly, probably the most important point is to be successful in these things is you must be one with your spouse. And I have to say this a little bit begrudgingly, it's because we weren't very well through that. And I think it made it more difficult. Obviously, you know, Ephesians 5:25, for husbands, this means love your wives just as Christ loved the church. I did really my best in certain areas, but I had a hard time always doing that. Added to this, Genesis 2:24 says, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. I could tell you that I left my mother and father. I did, and I held fast to my wife, but we didn't become one flesh. We maybe did via our marriage vows, but we were disconnected in lots of ways, and we recognized it, and we knew we needed to be on the same page. And there was a point towards the end when he started getting well, that we started getting well, or maybe we started getting well and he started getting well. And again, anybody who's married knows it's not like all of a sudden you snap your fingers and it's just done and it's a piece of cake, but it's headed towards the right direction. And we're more focused on that. In these situations, Satan tries to place a wedge between your family, and he got in with us. He got in with us, and one of the things I thought was wise is committing to your marriage vows, and recommitting, and place your spouse as your top priority right after God. So as we're starting to heal, our family's starting to heal. The challenge that we went through did affect us dramatically. And until even recently, even when he was back, we lived in a fight or flight mode a little bit, not sure what the next thing was going to happen. God dealt with us throughout really wonderfully with our daily times with him. We always have been dedicated to daily times, even in the tough times, especially in the tough times, through our devotions and prayer and Bible study and people, sermons that we listen to, songs that we listen to. Psalms 121 declares, I look up to the mountains. Does my strength come from the mountains? No, my strength comes from God who made heaven and earth and the mountains. The song Shout to the Lord by Chris Tomlin proclaims, the mountains bow down and the seas will roar at the sound of your name. I honestly, the Lord has blessed us so much through this incident, in that we know where our strength comes from. We know who made our son and made us, and knows what's happening. It was just a time that we had to go through, and frankly, I want the time we went through to be able to help and benefit other people, in a way that maybe they don't have to go through it, or maybe I have some insight. What's interesting about it is, as I told you, I'm a bit of a big mouth, and going forward with the fact that this is who I've been, and this, you know, I'd let anybody who'd listen hear about the fact that we had to go through this, and I witnessed to a lot of people about this, and 25 times someone said, I know just the person you need to talk to. I'll have them call you. I've never received a call. I guess what the point is it's when you're in the midst of it, you're full of despair, and you just can't almost see outside. So there's a point of maybe publishing this story so that people can see that there is an outside to, the overwhelming fear and anxiety, and how they need to release that to the Lord. And they may still lose their child, but in the meantime, the Lord's plans, will help them through. And frankly, this was not a problem with my son not giving an effort. Frankly, it's not that we didn't solve a problem. The solution to all this is that it's not something that on hard effort you get through. It's something that you get through with the Lord's help. And again, some people can find their way through it in different ways, but at the end of the day, he worked hard at his sobriety for those 7 years. And somewhere in there, he surrendered. And in his surrender, he got on his hands and knees, and it could fall in line with just about anybody. It doesn't even have to be struggling, but in that surrender, he dealt with an issue that he had a change of heart. The Lord then took him that day, and I'm sad to even. I mean, I'm happy but sad in saying it. But he took him that day when he got on his hands and knees, and he looked up somehow, and he said, "I can't do this anymore." And then the Lord said, "Okay, today's the beginning of the day. Hold on, let me get that Windex and wipe your slate completely clean." And he just wiped it clean that day. And he's like, "Okay, it's not going to be like a one-day thing, buddy, but we'll start walking through it." And he started putting people in his life. He started putting people in our life. He started helping us to, to get our stuff together. And it just all came. So praying with your son and daughter, pray with alone, obviously, it just was something that really helped us through. So that's it.
Please pray for us and our listening audience.
Okay, so Lord, through this story, thank you for putting the right ears to hear the story today, and thank you for the 3 or 4 year transition that I've had to go through, and my wife and I have gone through the end of our son and the story of his addiction and all that you've taken away. Thank you for the healing through these different classes and teachings and preachers and all the things that you put in our path. Father, I just ask that you contend with us, in dealing with our challenges. You help us to put the right people in our place. You help us to be in the right place at the right time. Lord, you are guarding and guiding over my family. You're guarding and guiding over all these families, and the kids and the nieces and nephews and the grandchildren. And I ask, Lord, that you just help us to put one foot in front of the other with you holding our hand at the same time. And we just need you so much, Father. In Jesus' name.